Hey Village, happy 2022. Welcome to the first installment, the first episode of the Village Recap for this new year. Today we're joined by Pastor Drew Fajan, and as you can see, we both have rad headwear or headgear, and so today maybe it'll be a beanies bro episode of the recap. So Drew, for this past Sunday, your sermon was titled The Hard Work of Hope. And so we have this wonderful piece of artwork here. Could you unpack for us a bit, recap for us a bit, how this piece of artwork ties in directly to the hard work of hope?
Absolutely, yeah. So Kirsten Graper, who is a junior in high school, did a really great work on this, and just want to give her a round of applause. Good job, Kirsten. Saoirse Seed helped me kind of plan things out too as we all worked on this together, but Kirsten did all of the painting work. The idea behind it actually comes from David Needham. David Needham's book. Shout out David, if you're watching this, we love you. You're the man.
I read on
David Needham. Not only do you have a building named after you, but you have our love too.
Yes, as alum, yes.
So the idea is that you've got this mountain you see, and this is like in the prophets. You see, there's a prophecy of hope, of future, of what you're aiming for. You see this, and as you get closer, you might notice that there's more detail than you thought. And as you get closer to that, you might see there's actually more going on behind the scenes, and you see, oh my gosh, it's not just one mountain, but there's a mountain range. When we look at the Advent, the coming of Jesus, and we see that it actually is in two parts, right? There's the first coming of Jesus, which we just celebrated, and we usually do 4 or 5 weeks of Advent a year. And then there's the second coming of Jesus, which we're also all anticipating. And so I kind of talked about hope in a few different pieces, because there's the piece of the path to trust, right? There's the piece of trusting Jesus and who he's been, who he's always been, what he's always done. And then there's the future to anticipate down here. And in between is our hard work of hope. I think we often think of a hope, like a hope sermon or a hope talk or hope book or something, to be this thing's going to be uplifting and exciting, and it is, and it should be. But there's also a lot of hard work that goes into hope. And so in the middle of hope, what we do is we anticipate the future, we trust the past, and then we interact with the middle space with endurance when it's difficult and with redemption all the time. So that's kind of the space here that we find ourselves. Peaks and valleys, all sorts of different things along the way. Maybe we're climbing, maybe we're, drowning, or somewhere in the story, and we're doing our work of trusting, anticipating, enduring, and redeeming. So that's kind of what I would say.
And could you remind for us again, if you can remember or recall, the 4 points that you gave in regards to hope? I think that was, like you said.
So you have the promises of God and the character of God to trust. You have the future to anticipate, and you can anticipate that based on the promises of God. God's never failed. God's always faithful. So we know God's going to continue to be who he always has been and do what he always has done. So we can anticipate the future as we know the past has been. And in the middle space is enduring and redeeming. And I'd actually like to talk quickly about that, if that's okay. Yeah, the balance between enduring and redeeming. I had a piece I really wanted to share in my sermon, but I looked at the clock and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going late. So I had to cut it. But there's this idea sometimes for Christians that this world will pass, and so I don't need to really care too much. I just got to stick it out to get to the end and then heaven, And that's kind of often written off as the enduring idea, that we will endure this situation, endure this earth, so we can get to the kingdom and we'll be all set. But that's not what Jesus tells us, and that's not what the story of the Bible tells us either, that actually this world is a place that God built us to inhabit, to rule with him, and to redeem with him. And we know that the way God works in the world primarily today, as like Leslie Newbegin would say, is through us. And so we need to figure out, what is my job in this world? And so yes, there are things that are challenging, and yes, we do need to endure, but a lot of our endurance should be really focused on redemption. What does it look like for us to redeem the broken world around us today? And so I think that there are part of redemption is enduring difficult circumstances. But a big part of it is looking at each difficult situation, at each piece of the mountain, the valleys, and the peaks, with this lens of redemption. How is God looking for me to redeem this situation And how is God using me to bring redemption into the lives of the people around me? And there's so much to talk about there. But there's one story I'd love to share too. Not long ago, my family and I went to the Nelson Mandela exhibit at OMSI. If you haven't gone yet, I think there's a couple weeks left, and I really recommend running down there. It's totally worth it. But while we were there, and we weren't there for too long because we have little kids and they have short attention spans. But while we were there, I was really struck by the example of Mandela. You know, he was a man who had deep Christian faith, and his hope in God allowed him to endure a lot of things. But he wasn't just enduring while he was in prison, he was also redeeming. And he likened himself in some senses to the Apostle Paul, who he said the Apostle Paul is a perfect pest. And I think that's so true, because he kept going even though people tried to squash him, you know? And the same thing's true with Mandela, and the same thing should be true with us. That even though situations in the world, the enemy, the world around us, even though our circumstances might be trying to squash us, we keep going because we have this redemption in mind. And so Mandela spent 27 years in prison. And one of the first things he does in the first few years out of prison is he does some sermons in churches. And he talks about how God didn't choose just one kind of person. God chose all of humanity. God chose all different kinds of people to be brought into the kingdom. And I just love that through his faith in Jesus, it inspired him to continue this fight against apartheid and the fight against segregation. And it was such a beautiful example. So I was so inspired by that exhibit. And I was thinking, okay, so what might be the stuff that I need to redeem today? I'm not in prison. You know, I'm not, like my primary work isn't writing letters from prison like it was with Paul or Mandela. But my primary work is what am I called to redeem today? So long answer to a short question.
No, that's fantastic. But, yeah, because what you shared about our hope not just being futuristic, I think goes so well with something I heard theologian Willie Jennings from Yale talk about recently, or maybe not recently. It was a lecture from a few years ago. But he talks about how for the Western Christian imagination, our understanding of the Christian life is so temporally oriented. It's revolved around time, and for any Western conception, it's past, present, and future. But a key component to the Christian life that we lack is a spatial awareness. It's not just about the time in which we find ourselves, but it's also about the places and the people and the things around us in which we find ourselves. Because so often, like you said, if it's just temporal, we can sum up the Christian life as if, okay, we've been saved and now we're waiting to get to heaven or wherever there is.
I'll fly away.
Yeah. And
good song.
Yeah. And we miss out on the places and the people that God has placed us in and with. And hope, I think, when taken with a spatial awareness, is exactly what this piece of artwork points us to. It's not just a when can I clear the mountain range, but how is hope rooting me when I'm in this valley, when I'm facing the mountains around me, when I'm facing one peak or a multitude of peaks. And so the Christian life really is multifaceted and so dynamic with its temporal but then spatial awareness. We're not, and I think that's what you were alluding to in your sermon, we're not trying to escape the time and place God has placed us in. Right. And that's why hope is not this weak, flimsy thing, because hope is not about escape, but hope is about endurance. Hope is about redemption. Hope is about being who God has called us to be in this moment. Right. And so when you especially, and I think what's so important for us to realize is, as we get older, we forget how much we take ourselves too seriously. And I think, and so where I'd love to steer this conversation in a bit is, as our youth pastor or youth director of youth and their families, the world that young people live in today, the space and the time they occupy, is vastly complex in comparison to the world we were in at their age. And at times, because of our age and the duration of our lives, we can think that the world is not that complex, but it could just be that we have more resources to make sense of the world we live in. Sure. Whereas as young people are still beginning that journey of formation and on formation, how do we offer ourselves to young people without, one, downplaying their experiences, minimizing their suffering, and just giving hope as like a slapstick Band-Aid? Because if hope really is about endurance, perseverance, and redemption, what's the type of hope for those of us who are a bit older than our younger people? How can we more faithfully be present with them? What is hope for a young person?
Yeah. So I think one thing that's really important to note is that there's no person who is too irrelevant for our youth. I think often people think, teenagers they really only want people who understand their language to talk with them, or who understand their life to talk with them. But we know that's not true. Just like any person, a youth wants someone to connect with them just because they care about them. And so if you show up in their life and say, I care about you, help me understand more about your life, and tell me what matters to you, and tell me about what following Jesus is like for you, that is amazing. That's a great way to connect with somebody who is maybe much younger and much cooler. That's one of the big things that's a barrier often, is that youth are too cool, they don't want to talk with me. And that's simply not true. It's not true. They need friends, they need community, they need people to support them of any age. And we believe that the best youth ministry is a multi-generational and multicultural youth ministry. And so people want to connect all across generations, and it's beautiful. So please, if you'd like to connect with our youth, you want to be a youth mentor, you want to help in some capacity, please let me know. I'd love to talk with you some more. As far as what hope looks like for youth, the world they live in, like you said, is vastly complex, and each person is a multitude of cultures in themselves. Because of the internet and because of the way our lives are today, our young people have so many different sources of understanding and of culture that each person is so unique. And so you won't find with teenagers today the same popularity complexes that there were in schools, even when we were in school. You won't find that there's, the football quarterback and the cheerleader are cool. It's there's just these little microcosms of culture that are cool and in their own way, or that are themselves in their own way. And the same is true with hope. Many youth put their hope in all sorts of different kinds of things. Many youth maybe love streaming video games, and that's really their joy. They get their hope from that. While other youth might love watching long YouTube videos where people are reviewing products, or things like that. There's so many different kinds of people, and just as there is anywhere. But I think it's vastly even more diversified now. Interests and passions, projects, those kind of things, because of the internet, which is a really cool thing. It does ask us to be much more creative and much more honest and just humble, and asking lots of questions when we want to connect with young people. People put their hope in all kinds of things, and just like me, or just like any person, we need to rearrange our hopes so that we're trusting in God's promises, enduring and redeeming the moment as we anticipate the future.
Yeah, and I think what you said about our youth and our young people that I'd love to highlight is it's not that, because we can stereotype anybody and everybody, so it's not that our youth are too cool or we're too uncool, but
no, it might be true sometimes.
Right,
sorry.
Most definitely, yes, but hopefully as a generalization, for the sake of relationship, I think the way that we experience hope is particular to each of our needs, and that's a great invitation for relationship. It's not to say that my concerns are any less or any more than Drew's, and vice versa, but it's to say the way that I experience hope may be different, but that does not mean it is separated. And that's the greatest invitation for all of us into this community and church and family as Village, is that the way that a young person experiences hope may be different than the way we experience hope, but that's such an invitation for us to better know one another and be hope-filled together towards the work of redemption and perseverance and endurance. And so especially if you're looking for a new way to be plugged in for this new year, would you contact Drew and really consider living life with our young people. There's so much for us to learn. There's so much for us to explore about God, and it can only be done in community. And so as we are a multicultural church in Christ, we especially need, like Drew said, the multiplicity of generations. We can't live our lives for Jesus within our particular age group alone, or else we become stale communion wafers. No, just kidding. But that's why we especially need young people. Oh, that's so bad. I'm so sorry. That was not supposed to be a gripe against our communion wafers. But I think young people...
They're prepackaged. It's
yes,
okay.
yes, prepackaged. Yes. And none of this is prepackaged. So you see, fresh out of the box. Rising leaven.
Bros.
But our young people, I think, teach us to ask raw, authentic, honest questions, because they haven't been taught to not ask difficult questions. And I think that keeps us really before God. That's why Jesus continually says, let the little children come to me. If you want to enter the kingdom, you must be like them. There's something so crucial to the Christian life that we must learn about God with our young people, because it's not just about a temporal Christian life, it's about the spatial Christian life as well. And so would we continually turn our eyes to God with one another? And that's the work of hope. The questions that we'd have for our DNA groups this week are this. How do you feel about the future? Are you excited about what's coming next? Are you feeling anxious or unsure? What might God be asking you to endure and redeem in this current moment? Furthermore, who might God be asking you to redeem and endure this current moment with? And then lastly, what promises of God can you trust to give you hope today? For me, I think it's a reminder that whatever promise God has given me, He's given to us together. Yeah. And so whether it's Drew and Charlotte in this room, whether it's you viewing this online, we look forward to celebrating God's promises to us with a hope-filled gathering every Sunday. So we'd love to see you at one of our weekly gatherings or through our weekly happenings. We'd love to connect with you. So glad to have Drew on this episode of The Recap, and so glad to be joining you here in this year of our Lord, 2022. Amen. Looking forward to the next episodes. Thanks, and we'll see you again.
Bye, friends.